December 2010. The air thick with cold mist enveloped the surface of Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, where winter winds blew across, making the water freeze hard as steel. The beam from Lieutenant David Mercer's flashlight, from the Cold Case Division, swept through rows of bare trees, shining on a moss and limestone-covered patch of ground behind an abandoned lumber mill. Heavy snow fell, mingling with the crackling radio static in the night. Mercer gently pressed the communication button, his voice deep but firm. "Central, I need the forensics team and excavation unit at the scene north of Lake Geneva. I think we've just found something." That voice echoed in the cold fog, blending with the wind whistling through the old branches. What started as a review of old files in the Walworth County Evidence Storage, the 1969 disappearance of Monica Halloran, had now become a discovery that shook the small lakeside community. A case once shelved, a young woman vanished in the midst of winter, a car left by the water's edge, all seemed like just an old news clipping from the local paper. But tonight, the flashlight beam was illuminating the very place where that secret had been buried. 41 years earlier, on the morning of December 14, 1969, Monica Halloran left home in her light blue Ford Fairlane, saying she would stop by the post office and supermarket before returning to prepare dinner. She never came back. That afternoon, snow fell heavily, the lake surface freezing over in a white expanse. That evening, her husband, Richard Halloran, called the police to report her missing. They found Monica's car by the lake, doors locked, keys still in the ignition, no footprints, no blood, no clues, just a woman's beige glove and a few Lucky Strike cigarette butts, the brand Richard smoked. Over 4 decades, the people of Lake Geneva had turned that disappearance into a sad legend. They remembered the kind teacher Monica, the model husband who founded a scholarship in his wife's name, the love story swallowed by winter snow. But in 2009, in the old file storage, a young technician named Aaron Jacobs found a dusty Nagra 3 tape reel labeled faintly, "Lunch, Halloran Meyer, December 12, '69. And when the tape was played, a man's voice came through the static, "I'll pay $80,000, just make her disappear." That was the moment Lake Geneva awoke after 41 years of silence. A disappearance thought forgotten, a tape buried in the dust of time, and a town that once believed justice had gone to sleep. Before we continue this shocking story, take a second to subscribe and like this video. Your support helps us bring forgotten cold cases back into the light and ensures you don't miss any upcoming journeys in search of the truth. Because the Lake Geneva case isn't just a mystery revived, it's a story of loss, persistence, deception, and justice delayed, but never denied. On the morning of December 14, 1969, snow blanketed the town of Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, turning every lakeside street into a silent white canvas. The air was thick with cold wind from the lake blowing hard through the rows of pines, making sounds muffled as if swallowed whole. In the small wooden house on Baker Road, Monica Halloran, 28, an elementary school teacher, slipped on a gray sweater and wrapped her favorite red scarf. She told her husband, Richard Halloran, that she would stop by the post office to mail a few letters and then swing by the Geneva General Store for some dinner supplies. At 8:15 a.m., Monica left home, driving her light blue Ford Fairlane onto the main road. The neighbor, Mrs. Louise Brenner, saw her through the frosted window, saw Monica smile, wave hello, then the car fade away behind the snow-covered trees. That was the last time anyone saw her. Throughout the morning, the snow fell harder. The whole town was enveloped in cold wind and an eerie white. By noon, no one had seen Monica at the post office or the store. The post office confirmed no mail under her name had been sent, and the clerk at the Geneva store said for sure she hasn't been in today. By late afternoon, snow piled nearly to the doorstep. Richard returned home. The kitchen light was still on, the soup pot on the stove, but cold now. 2 plates were set on the table, and the napkin Monica usually used was draped over a chair. Outside, the wind howled in long gusts, snow still falling heavily. No footprints on the walkway. By 8 o'clock that evening, Richard began to worry for real. He called a few of his wife's friends, then the school where she taught, but no one had heard anything. Each call only thickened the silence in the house. When the clock struck 9, he picked up the phone, his voice choked. "I think something's happened to my wife," Richard said softly. To the dispatcher at the Walworth County Sheriff's Office. "She's been out since morning and hasn't come back, and it's snowing like crazy. I'm afraid something bad has happened." On the other end, the dispatcher jotted notes quickly, then promised to send someone right away. And outside the Halloran house window, snow fell white and thick, blurring every trace relentlessly through the night, falling so heavily it covered the entire porch. Until the first light of the morning of December 15th filtered through the frosted curtains, the town of Lake Geneva remained eerily silent. The lakeside road, where Monica usually drove to work, was now just a vast white strip merging with the gray sky. Sheriff Dale Langford got the call at 6:08. A young woman missing in the snowstorm, her husband saying she left home the day before and hadn't returned. The light blue Ford Fairlane was spotted first, tilted slightly off to one side on the roadside, about 30 meters from the lake. Snow had covered the hood, the headlights still faintly glowing, the engine long cold. The car door wasn't locked. Inside on the passenger seat was Monica's purse, wallet, a small notebook, and a few scattered coins. No signs of a struggle, no footprints leading away from the car, just smooth, pristine snow, as if no one had ever stepped through. Langford stood still for a moment, his breath turning to white vapor in the freezing air. He knew that if that woman was still out there, every hour that passed was an hour against the deadly cold. The search team was mobilized that morning. On the lakeshore, men in thick coats, holding iron hooks, probed the ice step by step as it began to thicken. A Bell Ranger helicopter hovered overhead, its light sweeping across the vast snowdrifts, where everything was just white and wind. On the ground, 3 bloodhounds sniffed into the wind, but found nothing. The temperature dropped below 20 below zero, the frost hardening like steel. Any traces that might have been there wiped clean in last night's storm. Around 10 a.m., a volunteer spotted something protruding from the snow near the water's edge. When they brushed away the snow, they found a women's beige glove, slightly damp and mud-stained. A few recognized it right away. Monica often wore that kind to school. Sheriff Langford bent down, looked around, the snow flat and undisturbed, no footprints or tire tracks. "It could have blown from the car," an officer said quietly, but his voice sounded uncertain. They bagged the glove in plastic and continued along the lakeshore in silence. Monica didn't smoke. All her colleagues knew that. She'd complained to friends that she hated the smell so much she couldn't be in a closed room with anyone smoking. The cigarette butts in the car couldn't be a coincidence. Sheriff Langford slowly closed the car door, looked around, the snow surface still flat, wind whipping tiny flakes against his face, leaving a stinging sensation. "Someone was in the car with her," he said, voice low but certain. "And that person didn't leave footprints." That afternoon, Langford went to the Halloran house. The 2-story wooden home sat isolated on the edge of town. Yellow light spilling through frosted glass, faint smoke rising from the chimney. Richard opened the door, his face pale, eyes shadowed from lack of sleep. He invited the sheriff in, his voice strangely calm. "I've already told the dispatcher everything," he said, pouring coffee, his hand trembling slightly. "She left the house that morning. She hasn't been herself lately. Maybe she needed to get away for a while." Langford observed every small detail. The tidy living room, no signs of hasty searching, walls hung with old wedding photos. He asked, "Did you argue with her recently?" Richard shook his head. "No, we were fine." After a brief hesitation, he added, "Monica was a bit depressed. She felt stuck in this town. Maybe she wanted to leave." He avoided Langford's eyes, looking down at his coffee cup. The sheriff was silent for a few seconds. He noticed the ashtray on the coffee table, also Lucky Strikes. "How long have you smoked that brand?" he asked casually. Richard smiled faintly. "Since college. Is there a problem?" Langford just nodded, jotted quickly in his notebook, then stood up. If she wanted to leave, he said. Why leave her wallet, money and coat in the car? Richard didn't answer, just shrugged. Maybe she wasn't planning to go far. On the way back, Langford said quietly to his deputy, "He's too calm for a man who just lost his wife." The deputy nodded, face showing concern. They pulled over on the roadside, looking out at the fog-shrouded lake. On the white ice expanse, only the wooden stakes with search flags from the day before remained, now nearly buried by new snow. That evening, Langford met with the other two investigators at the county office. They reviewed Richard's timeline for the past 2 days. The evening of December 13th, he claimed to be home all night, watching TV late. No witnesses to confirm. On the morning of the 14th, he left home at 9 a.m., stopped by his vitamin factory, but employees said he didn't show up until after 11. 2 hours unaccounted for. Exactly the time Monica left home. Langford requested a check on Richard's bank accounts. A county accountant confirmed 3 days before Monica's disappearance, he'd withdrawn a large sum, $80,000 in cash. When asked why, Richard said for investing in a new branch. But there were no papers or contracts to back it up. That night, Langford sat alone in his office. Outside the window, snow still fell, street lights reflecting off the ice on the glass. He opened his notebook. Car, parked deliberately. Lucky strike butts. Richard unusually calm. Large withdrawal. Below he added a short line. Motive unclear, but something feels wrong. He leaned back in his chair, eyes on the Lake Geneva map pinned to the wall, where small red dots marked search areas. A cold premonition crawled down his spine. Something in Richard's story didn't add up. Monica Halloran wasn't just missing. Someone had made her disappear, calculatedly, in the midst of this white winter. 3 days after the official search was suspended, the Walworth County Sheriff's Office still hadn't shaken the heavy atmosphere. Cold coffee cups littered the desks, and every conversation revolved around one thing. Monica Halloran seemed to have vanished completely. But on Thursday morning, a middle-aged man named Frank Meyer walked into headquarters, fedora in hand, face tense. He was Richard Halloran's close friend and longtime business partner. After a few minutes of silence, Frank said softly to Sheriff Langford, "I think I need to tell you something I shouldn't keep to myself anymore." Langford looked straight at the man sitting before him. Frank took a deep breath, hands clenched tight. "Last week Richard told me that he wanted to end all the trouble with his wife. At first, I thought it was just venting after an argument. But 2 days later, when Monica disappeared, that phrase kept replaying in my head." He bowed his head, voice fading. "I think he meant it." Langford was silent for a moment. Outside the window, snow still fell, flakes slowly settling on the sill. "Do you have any other evidence?" "No," Frank replied. "But I can get him to say it again. He trusts me. We have lunch together every week at Maxwell's Supper Club. If he says something like that again, I'll tell everything." Langford considered for a moment, then called Deputy Sheriff John Clemens, who had experience with covert recording devices. They planned it that night. Frank would meet Richard at their usual lunch spot, and Clemens would provide him with a Nagra 3 recorder, a compact reel-to-reel machine, weighing nearly 2 pounds, commonly used in surveillance ops back then. He'd wear it in the lining of his coat, the mic cord threaded through his collar, activating with a simple head tilt. The next noon, Maxwell's Supper Club, a small diner with warm lights and faint jazz music, was nearly empty due to the snowstorm. Frank arrived early, ordered black coffee, and sat in the far corner, unnoticed. Half an hour later, Richard Halloran walked in, coat dusted with snow, face as calm as if nothing had happened. They shook hands, ordered beef stew, and whiskey. The conversation started with business. New shipments, upcoming taxes, town gossip. Frank circled around it, mentioning the police still hadn't found Monica. Richard just shrugged, voice chillingly nonchalant. She could be anywhere. Maybe she finally did what she wanted. Frank looked at him, hesitating slightly, then said quietly, "Do you think they'll suspect her disappearing so suddenly like this?" Richard chuckled softly, eyes darkening briefly. They've got nothing on me, and I've got nothing to fear. He sipped his whiskey, fingers tapping the table. Then, as if reconsidering, he leaned forward, voice lowering. I don't want to get into details, just understand I've handled everything. I'll pay 80,000, just make her disappear. Don't ask more. Frank sat frozen, heart pounding in his chest. The tape in his coat whirred steadily, the machine's needle vibrating faintly. He tried to keep his voice normal. Are you sure? That's dangerous. Richard just smirked. Don't worry, I didn't do it myself. I know how to make things disappear. A long silence stretched between them, broken only by the soft clink of a spoon stirring coffee. After the meal, Frank shook Richard's hand and left the diner, stepping out into the thickening snow. As he hurried to his car, his hand shook not from cold but fear. He drove straight to the sheriff's office, where Clemens and Langford waited. Frank removed his coat, handed over the Nagra. The reel still spun, indicator light blinking faintly. Langford listened silently to the first sounds. Jazz music, clinking silverware, then Richard Halloran's voice, low and clear. I'll pay 80,000, just make her disappear. In the small room, no one spoke. Langford stopped the machine, set the reel gently on the table. He knew they'd just captured something many cops never get to hear. A man all but confessing in his own words. Clemens immediately sealed the tape, labeled and signed it, then locked it in the evidence room safe. Langford looked out the window. Snow still falling, large heavy flakes melting on the glass. If we don't find her, he said slowly, it's all just words between two men in a diner. The next day, the tape was sent to the county prosecutor's office. A young prosecutor listened through it, then just sighed. No body, no specific act, no charge to bring. Langford said nothing, just stood looking out at the yard, where ice had covered last night's footprints. He knew the case wasn't over. It was just that the snow kept falling, and the truth was burying deeper by the hour under Lake Geneva's ice. 2 weeks after the recording tape was sealed, the investigation into Monica Halloran's disappearance hung in limbo. Sheriff Langford believed they'd touched the truth, but they had nothing solid enough to charge Richard. The tape was just words between two men. No specific act, no body, no direct witness. The prosecutor's office refused to prosecute, citing lack of elements of the crime. Langford didn't argue, but his eyes showed clear frustration. He knew he was looking at a guilty man. The law still had to call a free suspect. Early January 1970, police returned to the Halloran house for one final search before the file was shelved. The quiet two-story wooden home sat hidden behind old pines. Inside, no signs of struggle or anything out of place. Everything too clean, too tidy. In the bedroom, Monica's closet was neatly rearranged, shoes lined up precisely. On the vanity, her favorite perfume bottle half full, next to a wooden comb with a few strands of blonde hair caught in it. Langford looked at the wedding photo on the wall, Richard in a black suit, perfect smile, Monica gazing up at him with gentle eyes. Did you love her? Langford asked as they walked the upstairs hallway. Richard leaned on the railing, hands in his pockets. Of course, he said, voice light and calm as if discussing the weather. I just want her back. I didn't do anything, Sheriff. As they left the house, Langford looked back one last time. Richard stood in the doorway, offering a tired smile, his face showing no fear or remorse. In Lake Geneva, people spoke of Richard Halloran with a mix of sympathy and respect. He was the model businessman, owner of the town's only vitamin factory, sponsor of winter festivals, donor to the church and schools. The local papers called him the poor widowed husband, who still hung his wife's photo in the living room and held an annual prayer vigil for her soul. The community gradually bought into his story. Monica had been under mental strain, perhaps left in despair, or slipped under the ice in the snowfall. Frank Meyer couldn't believe it. He lost sleep for nights, Richard's voice on the tape echoing in his head. I'll pay 80,000, just make her disappear. He went to see Langford one more time, but got only a heavy head shake. We tried, Frank. No body, no murder case. A week later, Frank packed his things and left Lake Geneva. He told a few friends he was moving to Illinois to forget it all. No one saw him return. A few months later, word was he got anonymous calls, veiled warnings. Forget about it, if you want to live in peace. Deputy Sheriff John Clemens, who personally held the tape that day, still believed there would come a day when they would reopen the case. He kept a small notebook in his desk drawer, with the final line written, "If the tape remains, the truth remains." But fate didn't give him the chance. In March 1971, Clemens died in a crash on the highway while driving home from a late shift. The car flipped into a snow-filled ditch, and the Halloran recording tape, the only copy, had been stored away a week earlier, sealed under his name. His death left Langford speechless. The two had started the case together. Now only he remained, with the unresolved obsession. That spring, the snow melted, and Lake Geneva returned to its usual gray-green hue. Life in the town gradually drifted back to its old rhythm, and the name Monica Halloran appeared less and less in conversations. The church still held a memorial service every December, but hardly anyone believed she would be found. The missing person file was relabeled "Cold Case," pending review. Yellowed pages, a few faded photos, and the sealed tape lay in the Walworth County archives, where time and cold snow would keep them dormant for the next 4 decades. Langford stopped mentioning the case. He stayed in the town, his hair turning silver with the years, but every time he drove past Lake Geneva, he still pulled over. The summer water lay mirror-still, reflecting the pale blue sky, so peaceful it made one forget that beneath the surface, a story had never been fully told. And in that peace, something continued to wait, as if the ice from that year hadn't fully melted, and Monica Halloran's secret was still imprisoned under the cold lake bottom. The 1970s closed in silence. Winter followed winter, snow still blanketing Lake Geneva every December, and the townspeople gradually stopped mentioning Monica Halloran's name. The photo of the young teacher smiling at the 1968 Christmas ceremony, once hung in the elementary school, was now yellowed and replaced by photos of the new generation of teachers. At St. Francis Church, all that remained was a small engraved line on the memorial plaque. Missing in the snowstorm, December 1969. For most of Lake Geneva's residents, she had become part of local legend, the woman who vanished under the ice and never returned. Richard Halloran was different. He continued living and seemed to grow richer as he went. In the early 1980s, his nutraceutical factory expanded, producing vitamins and supplements, shipping across the state of Wisconsin. The press wrote about him as a pioneering businessman, and the community saw him as a model of recovery after tragedy. Every Christmas, he sent large donations to the church, named scholarships Monica Memorial for underprivileged students. An act that moved many. They said he did it to honor his lost wife. A quiet atonement for unending pain. At town gatherings, Richard always maintained his composure, speaking softly, and it seemed no one suspected anything anymore. The whispers from 1969 faded with time. Frank Meyer never returned to Lake Geneva. Sheriff Langford retired in the early 1980s, leaving Walworth County, carrying a thin file in his suitcase, and never mentioning the case again. When he died in 1995, all that remained were a few black and white photos and a note in his notebook. She never left. In the old evidence storage of the Walworth County Sheriff's Department, everything lay as still as it had 40 years before. The metal box containing the Nagra tape, a few crime scene photos, a copy of Richard's bank check, along with Deputy Sheriff John Clements' report, all sealed in a brown cardboard box. The box label read in faded blue ink, WSC 014, missing female, December 14, 69. Over time, dust covered the lid thick as a blanket, and no one remembered them anymore. The 1990s and early 2000s brought change to Lake Geneva. Tourists flooded in, lakeside hotels sprang up, turning the once quiet town into a famous resort destination. The Halloran house still stood there, overlooking the lake, now repainted silver gray, windows always shut tight. Richard lived alone after his second wife died, hair silver, back slightly stooped, but still appearing regularly at community events. He spoke less, but whenever someone asked about Monica, he just smiled. She was the best memory of my life. No one wanted to ask more. Until 2009. That summer, the state of Wisconsin launched the Cold Case Digitization Project, a program to review and digitize thousands of unsolved case files from the 1950s, 1980s. The goal? Preserve original evidence while seeking opportunities to apply new forensic technology to reopen cases thought long dormant. The Walworth County Evidence Storage, in an old red brick building near the docks, was selected as one of the first pilot sites. A team of young technicians was sent in, led by Aaron Jacobs, 32, an imaging data specialist. Born in Madison, raised in the digital age, she'd never imagined she'd one day touch the dusty file boxes of the past. Aaron later recounted, "When I opened the door to the old storage room, the smell of damp paper and rust mixed together, like stepping into a time capsule. Each file box was an untold story. In the early days, they mostly sorted files by year and crime type, thefts, accidents, disappearances. Most were just crumbling papers, blurred crime scene photos. But one September afternoon, while sorting a shelf labeled 1969, missing person, Aaron noticed a different metal box. It wasn't like the other cardboard ones. Heavy, thick, sealed, with old red tape. The lid, handwritten in faded blue ink. She used rubber gloves, gently brushed off the thick dust, and read the words, "Lunch, Halloran Meyer, December 12, 69. Aaron's heart pounded. She didn't know who Halloran was, but instinct told her this was something important. When she opened the box lid, inside was an old reel-to-reel tape, small, with a darkened paper label over time. Under the tape was a faded typed report, recording made at Maxwell's Supper Club, provided by F. Meyer. Aaron set the tape on the table, yellow light from the bulb shining on the dull metal, reflecting a thin line like a knife blade. She didn't know that this moment, when a young technician accidentally opened a file box dormant for 40 years, was when the ice on Lake Geneva began to crack. For hidden under the dust, inside those silent tape loops, was the low, raspy voice of a man who had spoken 40 years before. "I'll pay 80,000, just make her disappear." The first sound was a faint metallic clink, then a few bursts of static like breathing in the dark. The Madison Lab's sound engineering room was deathly quiet, only the slow whir of the reel on the restoration machine. Aaron Jacobs sat outside the soundproof glass, hands clasped tightly, eyes fixed on the frequency display screen. She'd sent the tape here the same day she found it, and for the past 3 days, the audio specialists had been denoising, restoring damaged segments. They didn't know what was on it, only that it was a 1969 police recording, sealed for over 40 years, a rarity even in Wisconsin state archives. A faint jazz tune played, then a man's voice rose, low and decisive. "I don't want details. Just make her disappear. I'll prepare 80,000. The room went still. The technician looked up through the glass. Aaron's heart pounded so hard she could hear it in her ears. She closed her eyes, listening again. Still that voice, same rhythm, same pause mid-sentence, and the soft clink of glass on table. The voice had a Midwest twang, clear consonants, cold, calm, unflinching. "Halloran," the technician read slowly from the tape label. "Lunch, Halloran Meyer, December 12, 69. Aaron couldn't speak, just signaled to save a digital copy and send it immediately to the state police. An hour later, the audio file went straight to Lieutenant David Mercer, veteran investigator in the Cold Case Division of the Wisconsin Department of Justice. Mercer had revived many old cases, but this was the first time he received original audio evidence from the 1960s. That afternoon, Mercer sat in his small Madison office, a waveform display on the screen before him. When the man's voice played again through the speakers, he leaned back in his chair, eyes darkening. "No traces left. I'll prepare 80,000. The phrase repeated 3 times, clear, enough to chill the room. Mercer asked the technician, "Are we sure this segment isn't spliced?" The other nodded. Seamless audio, no editing signs. Direct from external mic. He sat a few more minutes, eyeing the timestamp on the tape label. December 12, 1969. 2 days before Monica Halloran disappeared. He opened the electronic file system, searching Halloran in the newly digitized database from Walworth County. One result appeared. Case file WSC-014, missing female, Lake Geneva, 1969. Mercer opened the file, skimmed the reports, witness statements, then stopped at Sheriff Langford's notes. Suspect Richard Halloran, husband. Circumstantial evidence, insufficient elements. Mercer was silent a long time. He looked out the window, where Madison's autumn light stretched over golden trees. A disappearance over 40 years old, a tape recording an offer of money to make her disappear. He knew this could be the key to reopening a door many thought locked forever. The next morning, Mercer drove nearly 3 hours south to Lake Geneva. The Walworth County Sheriff's headquarters was in a new building, but the old archives remained in the basement, holding thousands of unprocessed files. There, he met Captain Howard Reeves, head of archives, who had been a young officer in the 1980s. Reeves dug through the old evidence catalog and brought out a sealed yellow envelope, labeled Bank of Walworth. Richard Halloran, December 12, 69. Inside was a copy of an $80,000 bank check, hand-signed Art Halloran. With the bank's verification stamp, 2 pieces of evidence, one spoken, one numeric, bore the same date, December 12, 1969. Mercer held the check in his hand, feeling like he was touching frozen time. He cross-referenced the info, then reopened Langford's notes in the file. Large unexplained withdrawal, suspect claims for investment, no verifying documents. Now, it all began to fit like the final pieces of a faded puzzle after 4 decades. Mercer called Erin Jacobs to confirm the tape's origin. Her voice trembled slightly with excitement. "We restored nearly all of it. You can even hear forks on plates. It's so vivid, like it happened yesterday." Mercer was silent for a few seconds, then said, "Erin, you just woke a case that slept for 40 years." That evening, in the quiet office, Mercer spread the entire file across the table. Photos of the Ford Fairlane, missing person report, statements, and the check. He played the tape again, hearing Richard Halloran's voice once more. Each word like a knife through the veil of time, cold, firm, without hesitation, no traces left. "I'll prepare 80,000. Outside, Madison lit up, buildings, reflecting light down onto the sparkling surface of Lake Monona. Mercer sat still a long time before picking up the phone, his voice hoarse but resolute. "I want to reopen the Halloran file. Start first thing tomorrow morning." In the dark spool of the old tape, the voice from 1969 continued to echo, carrying the breath of a distant winter where the snow had long melted, but the secret had never truly slept. 3 days after the Halloran file was officially reopened, Lieutenant David Mercer drove out of Madison in thick morning fog. He carried a copy of the 1969 check, a transcript of the tape contents, and a name the new database provided, Frank Meyer, born 1935, currently residing in Joliet, Illinois, less than 2 hours' drive from Lake Geneva. The old file's note was brief: provided recording device, witness no longer in area. Mercer knew that if the tape was evidence, the man who made it was the missing piece. The street where Frank lived was a quiet neighborhood, small houses, large yards, maples bare for early winter. When Mercer knocked, it took nearly a minute to hear slow footsteps inside. The door cracked open. A white-haired man, tall and thin, in an old cardigan, peered through thick glasses. "You're police? Cold Case Division, State of Wisconsin," Mercer replied, flashing his badge. "I'm here about the Monica Halloran case." At that name, Frank froze. His lips moved as if hearing a voice from the past again. He invited Mercer inside, poured hot tea, then sat in the old leather chair by the window. On the wall hung a black and white photo, two young men in suits, smiling faintly in front of Maxwell's Supper Club. Mercer recognized it immediately. Frank and Richard, 1969. Frank was silent a long time before speaking. "I thought no one remembered that anymore," he said, voice raspy, trembling slightly. "I figured it died with time." Mercer opened his notebook, nodding gently. "But you're the last living person who can tell the whole story." Frank recounted it, piece by piece, slowly and carefully. In 1969, he and Richard Halloran were business partners in pharmaceuticals distribution. When Monica disappeared, police came to him, Sheriff Langford and Deputy Clemens, suspecting Richard's involvement. They wanted him to record a meeting between the two, hoping Richard would slip and confess. "I remember clearly, it was December 12th, Frank said, eyes toward the frosted window. "We had lunch at Maxwell's, where Richard always went. They gave me the Nagra, hidden in my coat. I was terrified, but when he said I'll pay $80,000, just make her disappear, I knew I had to turn the tape in right away." Mercer jotted every word quickly. "What happened after?" he asked. Frank sighed, hand shaking as he held the teacup. "I handed over the tape. They said they'd prosecute. But then, nothing. A month later, I started getting strange calls, all cold voices. Someone said, 'Forget it.' I got the message best to disappear. I sold the house, left Wisconsin." Frank stood, walked slowly to the wooden cabinet, opened the bottom drawer. He pulled out a small yellowed envelope, inside a handwritten note in familiar slanted script. "Frank, I've prepared the payment as promised. We won't have to worry anymore. R." The paper had no date, but the blue ink was smudged, handwriting shaky, as if hurried. Mercer stared at the words a long time, then gently placed it in an evidence bag. "How long have you kept this?" 40 years, Frank replied, eyes welling up. "I never dared burn it. Maybe I knew someday someone would come asking." Mercer closed his notebook, voice low. "Frank, your words will be fully documented. This is the most important evidence in the file." Frank nodded, his aged hands clasped tight. "I don't want revenge," he said slowly. "I just want Monica to rest. She didn't deserve to be buried in silence like that." As he left the house, Mercer paused on the porch steps, looking through the bare trees. The winter sun slanted low, pale light falling on the envelope in his hand. Inside, Richard's letter, the final evidence linking past and present. He knew the Halloran file was no longer just a disappearance. It was a murder, and it was time for Richard Halloran's name to return under the light of the law. Back in Lake Geneva, Mercer knew he had an indirect confession from the tape recording and the handwritten letter, but to retry after over 40 years, he needed something irrefutable, physical evidence. In the old evidence catalog, he noticed an almost forgotten entry. Vehicle, 1968, Ford Fairlane. Recovered December 15, 1969. Impounded Walworth County. The notation stopped him short. If the car was still there, it could be the only door back to a scene buried in snow. Early the next morning, Mercer and the forensics team drove to the county's evidence storage warehouse, an old shed on the town's edge, holding hundreds of forgotten relics from the previous century. The warehouse keeper, a silver-haired ex-cop, led them to the farthest corner, where dim light barely illuminated swirling dust motes in the air. There, under a thick tarp and 40 years of dust, was Monica Halloran's light blue Ford Fairlane. Mercer touched the icy cold hood, paint faded to silver gray, tires flat, but license plate intact. He stood still a long moment, as if facing a silent witness. "Secure the scene," he said quietly. "No one touches it until the tech team arrives." That afternoon, the car was transported to the Wisconsin State Crime Lab in Madison. They treated it like fresh evidence, every surface scanned with UV light, every seat crevice, every door seam swabbed. Technician Dr. Amy Rolstad, DNA expert with the State Forensics Lab, told Mercer, "We'll see if time left anything for us." 3 weeks later, When the first analysis results arrived at the Cold Case Division office, Mercer knew he held what he'd waited 40 years for. On the white handkerchief found in the back seat, an item noted in the 1969 report, the lab detected male DNA. And on the Lucky Strike filter tips in the ashtray, they found the same genetic match. A comparison from the state DNA database confirmed Richard Halloran, 99.98% match. Aaron Jacobs, who found the tape, was the first Mercer called to the office to hear the results. He placed 2 envelopes before her. One the DNA report, one a copy of the 1969 check. "Now," Mercer said, voice low, "we have the voice, the paper, and the biological trace. No body, but enough science." Dr. Rolstad continued her report in the mud samples from under the car. They detected mineral structures and silica grains unique to a small area south of Lake Geneva, near Halloran Nutraceuticals, the factory Richard owned since 1967. Under the microscope, the soil samples matched perfectly. Mercer sat silent, tapping his pen on the table. He knew this was the clue Sheriff Langford never had, physical evidence tying Monica to her husband's factory, a place she had no reason to visit. That evening, he returned to the file room, looking at the 1969 crime scene photo of the Fairlane in the snow. In the image, headlights still faintly on, snow thick on the roof, license plate reflecting police lights. Beside it, Langford's handwritten note. No skid marks. Vehicle stopped deliberately. 40 years ago, Langford had sensed what Mercer could now prove with DNA, soil, and audio. Mercer sent the full revived file to the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Eastern District of Wisconsin. In the petition to reopen the case, he wrote, "I believe Monica Halloran was murdered on or shortly after December 14, 1969. Current scientific evidence, including DNA, geological traces, and financial proof, is sufficient to constitute first-degree murder. Suspect Richard Halloran." That night, Madison was shrouded in cold fog, and Mercer still sat in his office, looking at the stacked papers, each one a revived fragment of memory. He placed Monica's photo next to the DNA results, then murmured, as if speaking to the departed, "You've waited long enough, Monica. We won't let you be forgotten any longer." Outside, winter wind swept through the city, carrying a faint sound like the cracking of ice on Lake Geneva's surface from years past, where, after 40 years, the truth was finally beginning to surface from beneath the snow. On the morning of June 3, 2010, Lake Geneva sparkled under early summer sun. The ice had long melted, the water a clear blue, reflecting the luxurious lakeside villas where the past seemed to have slumbered peacefully for 40 years. But that morning, an unmarked convoy of Wisconsin State Police vehicles quietly pulled up to the gates of the largest among them, a 2-story oak house with a gray slate roof, owned by Richard Halloran. In the lead SUV, Lieutenant David Mercer sat silently, his hand lightly gripping the file folder on his lap. Inside was the arrest warrant approved by the Walworth County Court the previous evening. Richard Halloran, born 1938, charged with conspiracy to commit murder in the 1969 Monica Halloran disappearance case. Mercer looked up through the car window. The house before him was so serene, it was almost mocking. The sound of birds and gentle waves lapping the shore blended together, as if nature were trying to conceal what man was about to do. He gave the signal, 2 plainclothes officers approached and knocked on the door, while 3 others circled to the back of the house. Everything unfolded in silence. A moment later, the door opened. Richard Halloran, now 72, with snow-white hair and a slightly stooped posture, stood in the doorway, dressed in a gray sweater and dark slacks. He squinted at the unfamiliar men on the steps. "What do you need?" His voice still calm, deliberate as always. Mercer stepped forward, pulling out his badge and the warrant. "Mr. Halloran, we're from the Cold Case Division, Wisconsin Department of Justice. We have a warrant for your arrest on charges of conspiracy to commit murder related to your wife, Monica Halloran's 1969 disappearance." There was no violent reaction, just a flicker in Richard's eyes. Then he turned to gaze out at the lake, where small ripples danced on the surface. "I knew this day would come," he said softly, his voice nearly blending with the wind. "You're a little slower than I thought." Mercer signaled an officer to read the Miranda rights. Richard extended his hands without resistance. The cuffs clicked shut with a dry snap. In that moment, 40 years of silence shattered. The neighbors, mostly elderly, stood frozen behind their fences, watching a scene they never imagined they'd see. The man once praised as the model husband, the generous businessman being led away in a ring of police. News spread faster than the wind. Less than an hour later, the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel broke the story. Cold case solved, after 41 years. Businessman Richard Halloran arrested in wife's 1969 disappearance. Local TV stations flooded into Lake Geneva. On screens, the lakeside villa appeared behind police barricades, yellow tape strung around. Cameras panning as the suspect's vehicle pulled away. The anchors spoke in a tone half astonishment, half outrage. The man lauded for 4 decades is now accused of hiring someone to murder his own wife. Mercer sat in the car behind Richard, quietly watching through the rearview mirror. He saw the elderly man still holding his head high, eyes showing no fear. Not like a criminal, not like a remorseful man, just like someone reviewing a chess game he once thought he'd won long ago. At State Police Headquarters, Richard was taken to Interrogation Room 3. He sat ramrod straight, hands placed before him. Mercer entered, set the file down on the table, and looked at the man across from him. 41 years, Mr. Halloran, he said softly. "We've heard your voice on the tape, seen your signature on the check, and found your DNA in Monica's car." Richard smiled, very faintly, then bowed his head. "The tape, it's still around?" Mercer didn't answer. He just turned on the recorder, playing a few seconds. Richard's voice filled the room, clear, low, no traces left. "I'll prepare 80,000. For a moment, no one spoke. Only the hum of the air conditioner in the background. Richard looked up, his aged eyes unusually bright. "I'm old now, Lieutenant. Some things are better left alone." Mercer replied slowly, "You're right, but justice never rests." In Madison, as the news was confirmed, Aaron Jacobs, the technician who discovered the tape, was in the data room. A colleague rushed in, holding a printout from an online news site, breathless. "They got him, Aaron. This morning." Aaron stared at the bold headline, "Model Husband Arrested." After 41 years, she froze, her hand gripping the table edge tightly. After a moment she whispered, almost only to herself, "It feels like the past just rose up." Outside, afternoon sun streamed through the window, casting light on the row of computers in the room. Aaron opened the audio file again, listening to the voice on the old tape. Now no longer a sound from the past, but living evidence that made the entire state of Wisconsin look back at what they'd forgotten. In Lake Geneva, the lake remained flat and calm, but the town's elders said that night, the wind over the lake carried a strange sound, the clank of iron chains, the crack of breaking ice, or perhaps just the whisper of a soul, finally heard after more than 40 years buried under cold snow. The interrogation room at the Walworth County Sheriff's Office was dim under yellow lights, shadows clinging to the 4 walls like a thick layer of time's dust. The wall clock read just past 8 p.m. Richard Halloran sat across from Lieutenant David Mercer, hands on the table, wrists still marked red from the cuffs. Before him was a cold glass of water and a thick stack of files containing things he thought had been buried for 4 decades. 6 hours passed, not a word. Mercer didn't press. He just sat there, occasionally shifting position, eyes never leaving the silver-haired man opposite. Richard stared straight at the wall before him, his face so serene it bordered on emotionless. The steady hum of the air conditioner, the soft tap of a pen on paper as an officer took notes in the corner, all blended into a silence thick as ice. Finally, Mercer slid a sealed envelope toward him. He opened it slowly, pulling out 2 sheets of paper and a thin CD. "Do you know what these are?" His voice even and low. Richard didn't look up. Mercer hit play, and the room filled with the characteristic static hiss of old tape. The man's voice from 1969 rose, clear, unmistakable. "I'll pay 80,000, just make her disappear." Richard closed his eyes. For the first time during the interrogation, his hands clenched, knuckles trembling slightly. Mercer watched him intently. "That's your voice, Richard," he said softly. "Your own, 41 years ago. And this," he placed the handwritten letter on the table. The yellowed paper with creased corners. Mercer read aloud. "I've prepared the payment as promised. We won't have to worry anymore." The room fell silent again. Richard still said nothing. Only the ticking clock on the wall, counting each beat as time rewound to the past. Mercer leaned forward, his voice dropping, sharp as a blade. 40 years. Did you think we wouldn't find out?" Richard opened his eyes. His gaze was no longer cold but weary, heavy-lidded. He looked at Mercer for a long time, then spoke slowly, voice raspy. "I've lived long enough to know nothing stays buried forever." He paused, taking a deep breath, then turned away, looking at the two-way mirror behind Mercer, where he knew someone was watching. "But sometimes, I wished it would stay under that snow forever." Mercer didn't respond. He just opened another file, sliding photos toward Richard. Images of the excavated Ford Fairlane, Lucky Strike butts, and the DNA results in bold, 99.98% match. R. Halloran. "No body, but everything else," Mercer said slowly. "We have you on tape, your signature, your DNA, soil samples matching your factory. We're just missing one thing." He paused, locking eyes with the man across. "Monica Halloran's body." Richard didn't avert his gaze. He smiled faintly, a smile dissolving into the air. "You still don't get it," he said quietly. "She's right here nearby, where I buried her." The whole room seemed to freeze. Mercer said nothing, just nodded slightly to the officer behind the mirror. In that instant, the air conditioner hum faded. The pen stopped scratching. Only the truth remained, silent but suffocatingly heavy. "Do you want to show us the spot?" Mercer asked, voice still soft but commanding. Richard looked down at his hands, the trembling hands of an old man, but a flicker of smugness lit his eyes, as if stepping into a final chess move he still controlled. "If I tell, it's all over," he whispered. "She's buried deep. No one would find her without me." Mercer sat still, then spoke deliberately, word by word. "You owe her that, Richard, and you owe this town. They believed you for 40 years. Now it's time to speak." A long silence stretched. Richard bowed his head low, breathing deeply, shoulders trembling slightly. Then he looked up, his voice breaking. "All right, I'll take you there." Mercer saw that look, exhaustion mixed with surrender, and knew the wall of silence had crumbled. He signaled the note-taker to stop, then stood gently gathering the files. "Let's go," he said, without looking back. Richard rose slowly, hands cuffed, his shadow stretching long across the dim-lit floor. As they stepped out of the interrogation room, the headquarters hallway was bathed in cold white light. Outside the door, Walworth's sky had darkened. Winds from Lake Geneva blew through, carrying salty, biting mist. Mercer paused, watching the man walking ahead, stooped back, silver hair stirring in the wind. In his mind echoed the words, "She's right here nearby." No one on the team knew where they were headed, but everyone understood this trip would end a winter that had lasted 40 years. And somewhere in the quiet Wisconsin night, the ground waited to be opened, along with the secret Richard Halloran could no longer take into the darkness. It was nearly midnight when the police convoy left Walworth County headquarters. Cold winds from Lake Geneva blew hard, carrying the scent of damp earth and heavy mist. In the lead vehicle, Lieutenant David Mercer sat beside Richard Halloran, now a 72-year-old man, with hollowed eyes and hands, trembling slightly in cuffs. He gazed out the window, where headlights cut through the thick fog of the road leading north, out of town. "Where are we going, Richard?" Mercer asked, voice low. The old man stared straight ahead. "The plot behind my old factory," he replied softly. "There's a small woods there, no one goes. She's still there. No one in the car spoke further, tire crunching on gravel, mixed with the patter of starting rain. They arrived around 1 a.m. The woods behind the Halloran factory, once part of the vitamin production plant's grounds in the 1960s, now lay abandoned. The rusted iron gate sagged crookedly. The old sign faded almost illegible, only faint letters, Hell Den L Labs, lost in moss and grime. Mercer signaled the forensics and crime scene teams to secure the area. Portable floodlights snapped on, casting a white beam over the damp ground. Richard stood in that circle of light, eyes half closed like someone recalling a distant dream. "I buried her, over there," he said, voice hoarse. About 20 steps from the concrete fence, near the big maple. Mercer followed his direction, counting steps in silence. Underfoot, thick moss, soft and cold, earth smell mingling with metallic dampness. When they stopped, Mercer spotted the massive maple trunk, leaning toward the lake, roots exposed like gnarled fingers. The forensics team got to work. 2 technicians carefully raked away moss and decayed leaves from the ground. Just minutes later, one froze. "Sir, there's something here." Mercer crouched, flashlight beam sweeping over something grayish, protruding from the soil, a bone fragment, small but unmistakably human. A stunned silence spread through the woods. Next, they uncovered an old metal shirt button, rusted, and a small gold ring, inside engraved faint initials, MH. Mercer stared at the item in the evidence bag, speechless. He turned to Richard, standing a few steps away, light reflecting off his wrinkled face. The old man didn't cry, just closed his eyes briefly, lips quivering. "We argued that night." Mercer approached, voice gentle. "Tell it all, Richard." He sighed, voice faltering in the wind. "It was December 13th, 1969. She wanted to leave me, said she'd go to Madison, stay with her sister. I got angry. I couldn't control it. I pushed her. Her head hit the table edge, and she didn't get up." He paused, eyes glazed, as if peering through time. "I panicked. I drove to the lake, staged the scene, parked her car there, left the headlights on, then lied that she vanished in the storm. The next morning, I came back here, buried her right in this spot. When the snow fell, no one saw a thing. The team fell silent. Rain grew heavier, wind whistling through the branches. Mercer bowed his head. 41 years, every clue, every suspicion, every word led back to that moment, a brief argument that turned into murder, then a secret buried under moss and limestone. The forensics team continued excavating through the night. They found more small bone fragments, part of the skull, and a few strands of wool fabric remaining, light gray, matching the sweater Monica wore when she left home that morning. The entire area was marked with yellow tape, technicians covering the scene with tarps against the rain. When the final sealed bag containing bone fragments was loaded, Richard slumped in a folding chair, face ashen. "I thought the snow would keep her forever," he said, almost to himself. "But maybe snow just hides guilt until it melts." Mercer approached, looking at the man before him, no longer Lake Geneva's model businessman, just a small figure in the rainy night. He said softly, "Richard Halloran, you're charged with first-degree murder." Another officer read his rights again. Richard didn't resist, just nodded, eyes fixed on the direction where the ring was found. As dawn broke, fog blanketed the woods thickly. Evidence transport vehicles departed, leaving only deep tire tracks in the wet ground. Mercer lingered a moment, gazing at the old Halloran factory sign in the faint light. Beneath the peeling paint, the words "Innovation for Health" gleamed like a bitter joke. He turned to the forensics team, voice deep and firm, "Seal off the entire area. From now on, this is a crime scene." The assistant noted it in the log, the final line closing 4 decades of silence. Case WSC 014, status, homicide confirmed. On the drive back to town, Mercer glanced in the rearview mirror. Far behind, the woods faded into the fog, only faint yellow lights illuminating the freshly dug earth. An old chapter had closed, and with it, Lake Geneva's silence was finally broken. Richard Halloran's trial opened in November 2010 at Walworth County Courthouse, amid Wisconsin's fall. Maple trees outside the courthouse grounds blazed with golden leaves, and on the cold stone steps, hundreds of locals had gathered since dawn. Many were former students of teacher Monica Halloran, now grandparents, parents. 41 years had passed since her disappearance, and that morning, they were there not just for a trial, but to witness justice, finally named. Inside the courtroom, tension hung so thick it was audible in every breath. Richard Halloran, 72, sat in the defendant's row in a gray suit with silver-rimmed glasses. His hair was snow white, skin wrinkled, but his posture straight, face calmly cold. At the prosecution table, District Attorney Mary Stevens prepared thick file stacks, each a slice of truth buried in snow for 4 decades. Beside her sat Lieutenant David Mercer, who brought the case back to light, now in the third row, silent but eyes never leaving the man at the bench. When Judge Raymond Lasker banged the gavel to open proceedings, the room echoed with the dry crack of wood, a sound rebounding from 1969. Mary Stevens rose, opening arguments with a firm voice. "Esteemed jury, today you will hear the voice of a man who once believed he'd buried every trace. That voice echoes from the past, and it slumbered for 41 years. But time cannot protect crime." She signaled the technician. Room lights dimmed, the large screen lit up. An old tape played static hiss, spoon clinking on glass. Then Richard Halloran's voice, low and clear. "I'll pay $80,000. Just make her disappear." No one in the room moved. A middle-aged woman in the public gallery raised a hand to her mouth, tears spilling. She'd been Monica's student in 1968. When the tape stopped, Mary Stevens continued, voice deepening. "This is the defendant's voice, words undeniable. It's the first link in a chain of evidence showing he not only conspired, but directly caused Monica Halloran's death." Evidence was presented one by one. Richard's handwritten letter to Frank Meyer, confirming the payment was ready. The $80,000 check, withdrawn on the exact date noted on the tape. DNA matching 99.98% on the handkerchief and cigarette butts in the Ford Fairlane. Soil under the car, matching the ground around Halloran's factory, where Monica was buried. And finally, Richard's confession in interrogation, "She's right here nearby, where I buried her." Each piece hammered home. Richard didn't object, didn't deny. When his defense attorney, a silver-haired man, argued that my client acted in temporary mental disturbance without intent to kill, Richard just turned to the window, where late autumn sun lit the glass. He said not a word. On the trial's 4th day, Lieutenant Mercer was called as a witness. He recounted the case revival, from Aaron Jacobs finding the tape to unearthing remains in the woods. His voice was measured, restrained, but each word weighted. When the prosecutor asked, "Do you believe Monica Halloran has finally been given justice?" Mercer paused seconds, then replied, "I believe she never truly disappeared. We just needed to find her voice through the ice." The courtroom fell silent. A gentle breeze slipped through the door crack, rustling the papers on the table. The jury took nearly 6 hours to deliberate. When they returned, everyone's eyes were weary but resolute. The jury foreman stood, holding a sheet of paper. "We, the jury of Walworth County, after considering all evidence presented, find the defendant Richard Halloran guilty of first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder." In the moment the judge read the verdict, many in the gallery held their breath. Defendant Richard Halloran is sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. Court is adjourned. The gavel sounded 3 times, each strike echoing 41 years of waiting. Mercer closed his eyes, sighing. He knew it wasn't joy, but a cold serenity. In the public gallery, Erin Jacobs burst into tears. She whispered to the reporter beside her, "I was just the one who dusted off a file, and justice, it found its own way back." Outside the courthouse, dozens of reporters swarmed. On the evening TV screens, the headline scrolled, "41 years of silence ends, Halloran found guilty." The anchor read Judge Lasker's famous closing statement, "No body, but the truth." and that truth has triumphed over time. Richard was led to the prison van amid flashing cameras. He maintained his composure, only turning to gaze north, toward the small woods behind the old factory. A reporter shouted, "Do you regret it, Mr. Halloran?" He didn't answer, just closed his eyes, stepping up into the van, hands trembling. That evening, Lake Geneva was lit up. Townspeople gathered by the lakeshore, once the disappearance scene, lighting memorial candles. Someone brought an old photo of Monica, placing it amid a circle of white flowers. An elderly woman said softly, "Her parents are both gone now, but I believe they can rest in peace." Wind from the lake blew gently, flickering the candle flames, reflecting light on the water. In the rippling waves, a young woman in a gray sweater seemed to appear, smiling softly before fading into the mist. After 41 years, Lake Geneva finally slept peacefully. Not because of snow cover, but because justice had returned, late but never forgotten. Winter 2010. As the first snowflakes began falling on Lake Geneva, the final report from the Wisconsin State Forensics Lab arrived on Lieutenant David Mercer's desk. On the first page, in bold print, DNA analysis confirmed. Remains identified as Monica Halloran. He read the line over and over, slowly, as if afraid that with one blink, everything would dissolve back into the silence of the past 40 years. The bone samples excavated from the woods behind the Halloran factory had been matched to Monica's hair samples stored in her 1968 teacher file. The results were an absolute match. No doubt, no hypothesis. Those bones, that ring, were the remnants of the woman the whole town once thought swallowed by snow. Mercer sat quietly in his office, snow blanketing everything outside the window. He held the small gold ring in the evidence bag, the ring engraved with faint initials MH, then gently clenched it in his palm. It was all over. No more mystery, only the truth, however belated. The news was officially announced on December 12, 2010, exactly 41 years since Monica's disappearance. Local papers ran it on the front page, "Remains found in woods identified as Monica Halloran. Case officially closed." The story spread across Wisconsin in hours. For Lake Geneva residents, it wasn't sad news, but a final note closing a tragedy spanning generations. A week later, the funeral was held by Lake Geneva, where Monica had lived and where it all began. That morning, the lake lay mirror still, light mist drifting over the water, snow blanketing the stone steps to the dock. Hundreds of townspeople attended, including aged faces carrying memories of 1969. Old colleagues, former students, those who once searched for her in that snowstorm. Aaron Jacobs was there too, standing silently at the back, holding a small bouquet. Beside her, Mercer in a thick coat, head slightly bowed. As the priest read the farewell words, a gentle wind blew, shaking snow from the branches onto everyone's hair. "We are here," the priest said, voice deep, "to bring Monica Halloran back to her home, and to tell her justice is never buried." The small casket, containing only the identified remains, was placed near the water's edge, where faint sunlight pierced the mist. A former student of Monica's, now a teacher herself, softly sang Amazing Grace. Many bowed their heads, tears mingling with the chill. Mercer felt Aaron's hand lightly touch his shoulder, trembling slightly. "She should have rested long ago," she said, voice choked. "But at least now, everything's back where it belongs." When the service ended, the casket was taken to the small cemetery south of town. The ground was still damp from melting snow. On the new grave, a simple granite headstone was placed, engraved, "Monica Halloran, 1941, 1969. She was never lost, only hidden." Below, a short prayer the priest had read, "And the truth shall set you free." That afternoon, as everyone had left, only Mercer and Aaron remained before the headstone. Sunset stretched across the lake, reflecting on the small waves. Mercer said softly, almost to himself, 41 years, but the snow finally melted." Aaron nodded, eyes teary, and she was finally seen. They left the cemetery as dusk fell. In the distance, Lake Geneva's town lights gradually came on, casting golden glows on the calm water. In the cold wind, the bells of St. Francis Church rang out, echoing far before fading into the white mist. For the first time in over 40 years, Lake Geneva was no longer a place of rumors and silence, but where Monica Halloran finally returned, not as a mystery, but as a person, a name, a memory restored to time. News of Richard Halloran's verdict and Monica Halloran's remains identification spread across Wisconsin like a deep rumbling shockwave. For Lake Geneva residents, it was a painful awakening after over 40 years of misguided faith. The man they'd respected, still called exemplary, kind, generous, turned out to be the one who killed the very wife. The whole town had mourned. In the days right after the verdict, the town's atmosphere carried a strange feeling, half stunned, half ashamed. At the lakeside coffee shop, where folks still gathered each morning, no one dared mention Halloran's name. Someone placed the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel on the table, where the headline took the entire front page. Justice after 4 decades, truth finally emerges in the Lake Geneva case. The article opened with a line that choked many for 40 years. They praised him. Now they must learn to live with the truth. Elm Street Elementary School, where Monica once taught 3rd grade, held a memorial ceremony. Teachers and students brought white flowers, standing in silence around the schoolyard. The new principal, born after Monica's disappearance, gave a brief speech. "Mrs. Halloran isn't just a name in our memorial book. She is proof that sometimes justice comes late, but never lost." After the ceremony, a memorial plaque for Monica Halloran was unveiled in the schoolyard corner. A simple stone slab engraved, "In loving memory of Mrs. Halloran, teacher, friend and light that never faded." Her former students, now adults, brought mementos, photos of the blonde teacher with a gentle smile, holding a child's hand as they practiced their first letters. Many wept quietly, realizing Monica's memory had never vanished. It was just buried under the thick ice of silence and blind faith. Meanwhile, Aaron Jacobs and Lieutenant David Mercer became the focus of press and TV. Aaron, the young technician who accidentally opened an old file box, was now hailed as the awakener of justice. She appeared on CBS 48 Hours, the frozen silence recounting the moment she discovered the old tape. When the host asked, "Do you think you just changed the history of a case?" Aaron just smiled. "I didn't change history, I just helped it say what should have been said long ago." Mercer, after the trial, was invited to speak at the Wisconsin State Police Awards ceremony. He stepped to the podium amid applause, hair more silvered, voice slow and steady. "Technology helped us find the evidence," he said. "But human memory is what never fades." A young technician saw what generations before overlooked. An old friend kept a letter for 40 years. Each person a piece, and when pieced together, justice is complete. The hall was silent, a long moment before erupting in prolonged applause. After the ceremony, the press called Mercer the man who gave Lake Geneva its voice back. The one who restored speech to a town silenced by guilt too long. Even so, not everyone accepted the truth easily. Some elderly residents, who once received funding from Richard's Monica Memorial Foundation, said they still found it hard to believe. He helped so many people. One man shook his head on local TV. "It's hard to think someone like that could kill his wife." But then he paused, sighing. Maybe that's why he did charity, to bury the other. That December, on the anniversary of Monica's disappearance, the city held a candlelight vigil by Lake Geneva. The sky was clear, snow falling lightly. Hundreds of residents stood around the shore, holding candles, light reflecting on the calm water. No one mentioned Richard Halloran's name anymore, only spoke of teacher Monica, her kind eyes, and the lessons she taught. Aaron stood beside Mercer, candlelight casting gold on her face. "You know," she said softly, "maybe silence is a form of justice too, if it finally forces people to listen." Mercer nodded slightly, eyes on the lake glowing in the snow. "Silence is only scary when it lasts too long," he replied. Tonight, Lake Geneva spoke. Wind blew through, flickering hundreds of candles. The shimmering light spread across the water, as if the whole town was exhaling after a 4-decade nightmare. In the sky, snow still fell, but no longer heavy. For the first time in years, Lake Geneva was truly freed. Not from memory, but from deception. 2 years after the trial ended, Monica Halloran's name still appeared regularly in the press, but now not in crime sections. In articles about justice reform and forensic science, her story became a symbol of memory's power, the persistence of those who refuse to forget. And above all, it made the entire state of Wisconsin look back at how justice can be buried and awakened by just a tape, a handkerchief, or a person who believes the truth is still there. Early 2012, the State Department of Justice officially established the Halloran Cold Case Fund, a special fund named after the victim, to finance digitization and evidence recovery projects in unsolved files. At the fund's launch, Lieutenant David Mercer was invited to speak. He stepped to the podium amid colleagues' applause, hair more grayed but voice still firm. "We can't change the past," he said, "but we can ensure no case is forgotten just because of time. The Halloran case taught me, evidence can sleep, but truth never dies." From that fund, dozens of files were reopened. Some 1970s disappearances began progressing. Old evidence once deemed useless was revived with new technology. The press called it the Halloran effect, as cold cases across Wisconsin were relit and evidence storage rooms became no longer places of dust and forgetting. That same year, Frank Meyer, Richard's old friend, who bravely recorded the first evidence leading to the breakthrough, passed away in his sleep at 77. In his will, he requested his ashes be scattered on Lake Geneva, where justice was once found. On an early autumn morning, Mercer and Aaron Jacobs stood on the old dock, the water mirror still. Aaron released the final handful of ashes into the waves, saying softly, "Without him, the truth might still be buried deep." Wind stirred, rippling the lake, reflecting brilliant golden sunlight, like a peaceful farewell. 3 years later, in summer 2015, news of Richard Halloran's death in Green Bay prison appeared in brief broadcasts, just a few lines. He died of old age, leaving no final words. The warden said, "He spoke little, lived withdrawn, and never showed remorse." In his cell locker were only a few personal items and an old photo of Lake Geneva in winter, the lake iced over. A distant figure of a woman in a gray sweater, smiling faintly in the snow, a 1968 shot, before it all began. When Mercer heard, he just paused a moment. "Justice doesn't need his remorse," he said. "Justice just needs to be acknowledged." The Halloran story gradually entered the curriculum at the Wisconsin State Police Academy. Instructors used it as a prime example of the endurance of evidence and memory. The lesson wasn't just about investigation techniques, but persistence. A forgotten tape in a damp storage, an old letter in a drawer, a young technician not overlooking a small detail, all linking into the chain of justice. Late 2016, at St. Francis Church, where prayers for Monica were once held, a small bronze plaque was added at the entrance, engraved, "In memory of Monica Halloran. Her story taught us to keep listening." Below, a Mercer quote, "Justice delayed is still justice, if someone refuses to forget." As night fell over Lake Geneva, lights reflected on the water, and snow flurried lightly. Townsfolk sometimes said they still heard the church bells echoing far, no longer mournful, but warm, serene. The painful memories of the case didn't vanish, but they'd been placed in their rightful spot in history, a reminder that justice may come late, but it will come, as long as someone still believes in it. Spring 2016, Lake Geneva gleamed like a giant mirror, reflecting the tender blue sky. After months of meetings and assessments, Wisconsin officially designated the lakeside area as a historic crime site, a location of historical value, not just for the crime that occurred, but for the over 40-year persistence in seeking justice. The mayor said at the press conference, "Lake Geneva was once a silent holder of pain. Now it will remind us that no truth can be buried forever." The memorial site dedication was set for December 14th, the exact day of Monica's 1969 disappearance. That morning, light wind, golden sunlight stretching over the shore, and snow just melted from the night before. Townsfolk from across the area arrived, bringing white flowers and blue ribbons, the color symbolizing unsolved cases. Dozens of Elm Street Elementary students, where Monica once taught, lined up neatly, each holding a small potted sapling. Laughter mixed with gentle waves lapping the shore, creating an oddly peaceful atmosphere for the special remembrance ceremony. Before Monica Halloran's name-engraved stone, now repositioned by the water, Lieutenant David Mercer stepped to the wooden podium, adjusting the mic. He was no longer an investigator, retired earlier that year, but his presence still hushed the crowd. Wind from the lake stirred lightly, ruffling his silver hair. Mercer looked around, seeing faces young and old, those who'd lost faith, and those born after it all ended. He smiled, voice slow but clear. 40 years ago, Lake Geneva was a place of silence. It held in its depths what we dared not face. But what I learned after all those years is every secret surfaces when the ice melts. The cold can slow time, but it can't stop truth from finding its way back. Light applause rose, mingling with the wind. Erin Jacobs stood behind, eyes misty. She still worked at the Department of Justice, now head of the Cold Case Digitization Program, carrying on the Halloran legacy. As Mercer stepped down, she approached, shaking his hand. "Without you," she said softly, "I might never have understood justice's true meaning." Mercer smiled kindly, replying, "No, Erin, you were the one who brought justice to life. You dared to listen." After the speeches, the children began planting small maples along the shore. Each tree bore a wooden plaque, "For Monica, 1969. As evening fell, the last sun rays lit the water, shining on the newly planted saplings, reflecting in a shimmering band like candles, illuminating memory. Erin quietly approached Monica's stone. She knelt, placing a bouquet of white lilies on the thin snow, head bowed low. On the slab, the deeply carved words still clear: she was never lost, only hidden. Wind blew through, carrying scents of fresh grass and mist, rustling a few petals. "You're remembered," Erin whispered. "Not for your death, but for what you left us." In the distance, St. Francis Church bells rang out, lingering over the lake. Townsfolk began leaving the small trees glistening in the late sun. Mercer took one last look at the scene, breathing deeply, feeling the first warm breeze of the season. Lake Geneva was no longer a place of rumors, fear, or silence, but where memories were preserved, a reminder that justice, though slow, can melt any ice. As sunset draped the water, Mercer and Erin left the shore together. In the sky, no snow yet, only pale light on each ripple. Somewhere in that quiet space, a soft, distant voice seemed to echo. Monica Halloran's whisper, finally heard in a Lake Geneva no longer silent. Winter 2017, snow returned to Lake Geneva, but no longer as a veil of silence like 40 years before. The Halloran story had spread beyond town borders, across Wisconsin and the U.S. major networks. From CBS 48 Hours to Dateline NBC, aired specials titled 41 Years of Silence, The Lake Geneva Case. In black and white footage, viewers saw the snow-covered lake again, the abandoned Ford Fairlane, the low voice on the old tape, and Richard Halloran's aged face on arrest day. The specials opened with a question that made the nation reflect: if justice must wait 41 years to be named, is it still justice? Legal commentators saw the Halloran case as a milestone for change in Wisconsin's justice system, where forensic technology, interagency collaboration, and human tenacity combined to shatter time's wall. A Milwaukee Journal Sentinel feature wrote, 40 years ago, evidence was just buts and words. Today, science turned those words into truth. The justice system no longer fears the past. It has learned to listen to it. Around then, the Cold Case Division received hundreds of letters from across the country. Many families with missing loved ones from the 1970s, 1980s wrote, "Thanks to Mercer, Erin Jacobs, and the team. One from Green Bay read, "Your story gives us hope that there's still a chance. Maybe one day, my mother's name will be read on the news again, not as a statistic, but as a person." Those words brought Mercer, though retired, back to headquarters a few days a week to advise on old cases. He said, "If Monica helps someone else be found, she's still alive." In Lake Geneva, town officials decided to make the case part of community heritage. In 2018, they created the Justice Never Sleeps Memorial by the lake. Site of Monica's stone, the student planted maples, and a bronze plaque with Mercer's quote, "Justice doesn't sleep. It just waits until someone dares to wake it." Each winter, residents held candlelight vigils there, no longer somber, but occasions to remind each other truth is never lost. Candle flames reflected on the lake, twinkling like small stars, evoking all unsolved cases and the promise they won't be forgotten. Aaron Jacobs returned yearly, quietly placing white flowers by the stone, then standing watching the snow fall, eyes distant but peaceful. A local TV station ended a case anniversary special with slow-motion footage, snow melting on Lake Geneva, droplets rolling down, merging into small rippling waves under sunlight. The anchor's voiceover, warm as a close. "Justice may come late, but it always comes when someone still believes." And in that scene, Lake Geneva, once swallowing a woman, a secret, and a community's faith, became a symbol of human steadfastness against time. No more silence, no more fear, just rippling water, like Monica Halloran's gentle whisper, finally heard in a melted winter. In America today, the Lake Geneva story reminds us justice doesn't come on its own. It needs persistent people and a learning system. A young technician like Aaron Jacobs just opened an old file box and dared to listen again to the Nagrathur tape, where Richard clearly said, 80,000, just make her disappear. But that courage sparked the digitization project, helping labs match DNA on the handkerchief and Lucky Strike butts, cross-reference the $80,000 check on Monica's disappearance day, then link evidence pieces to the abandoned Ford Fairlane. Real lesson: responsible storage saves real lives. Keep emails, letters, photos, voicemails, photograph important documents, backup phone numbers, appointments. And if you spot red flags in close relationships, threats, financial control, staging scenes, report to police early and seek community help. From Mercer, we learn professional endurance. Ask again, don't let a model husband facade blind you. From Lake Geneva's community planting trees and erecting Justice Never Sleeps plaques, we learn turning loss into civic commitment, serve on juries, support local cold case funds, and teach kids critical thinking. Today's tech, biometrics, data normalization is stronger than 1969, but still needs humans willing to dust the past. When we preserve, speak up, and stand with victims, the snow in long cold cases melts, and justice, though late, finds its way home. If you believe justice never sleeps, and truth always finds a way to surface, subscribe to the channel to join us in continuing the journey, uncovering cases forgotten by time. Thank you for following the Lake Geneva story. See you in the next video, where another American mystery will be awakened.